What's up, everybody? So, today I'm going to be doing another tier list. I promise I'll be doing more than just tier lists in the future. Just for now, this is a simple format, and I'm going to proceed doing this. Um, but today, the tier list will be of the discography of my personal favorite artist, Tech9. And when I say that, I mean only his 13 solo LPs, not his collabo albums, no EPs, compilations, or mixtapes, just solo LPs. So, yeah, I just want to express this right now that this is my opinion, and if you disagree, too fucking bad. That's not my fault. But, anyways, let's get started. I'm going to try to do this in order of release. So we're going to start with The Calm Before the Storm. It's it's kind of different from the rest of his discography because in a way it's kind of like I don't want to say it's a trap record, but it's pretty close to what I would consider to be trap. I'd probably label it as pre-trap, and overall, I think it's a pretty solid project. All of the beats sound pretty similar, which is one drawback, but there is a bright side to that. I do like the style of production on this album. It sounds spacey and like there's just a lot of soundstage on this album. It just sounds really interesting, albeit it does get repetitive in the production style. And then the subject matter is pretty much what you'd expect from an album that I'd say is pretty close to trap. There's a lot of records on there about partying, about fucking women, about being a thug and whatnot, gang banging and everything. Overall, I'd say The Calm Before the Storm is a C. So let's put that in C tier. Okay? Next up, we have the worst, as in the worst production. I struggled to get through this entire album. It all in all, it's really similar to The Calm Before the Storm in terms of subject matter. You know, this is his really early music before he started to get a little more experimental with everything. And honestly, I think the biggest drawback of it is the production. The album pretty much gave me a headache when I was listening to it. It it just has so much mid bass that's just like boom boom boom. Like not even like good interesting sounding mid bass, just throbbing mid bass that just really made my head hurt. And it doesn't have like the interesting sounding soundstage of The Calm Before the Storm. And overall, I'd say the worst would have to go in F tier. It's just I I can't get past the fact that the instrumentals on this album make my head hurt so much. Um, Other than that, it's really similar to The Calm Before the Storm, and if you like that type of album, just listen to The Calm Before the Storm. Next up, we have Angelic, which, of course, is one of his most beloved albums. I love Angelic. It showed a big change in his musical direction. He was no longer making all this gangsta rap, all of this party music and everything. I mean, there were still some party tracks on Angelic, but all in all, Angelic was much deeper than his previous two albums, and the production, while pretty repetitive, is also pretty good. And yeah, it's one of his best albums to date. Many consider it to be his best album, but I personally wouldn't say it's his best album. So I'm putting Angelic in A tier. Next up, we have Absolute Power, baby. Whoo! Yeah, Absolute Power is. I don't want to spoil where I'm going to put it, but Absolute Power is my personal favorite of all his albums. It's just like the most experimental album he's released. It's just as deep, if not deeper, than Angelic, and it has good variety. I will say this, that unlike Angelic, it does have a bad song on it. I hate Bianca's and Beatrice's, but if I ignore that one song, overall, I think Absolute Power, for me at least, is a 9 out of 10. So I'm putting it in S tier. Next up, we have Everready. And again, more praise because Everready is also one of his best records to date. Um, it's very upbeat. In fact, it's probably his most upbeat album ever released, and there's definitely a lot of party tracks on it, and there's a lot of captivating flows and everything. You have some nice features. I know off the top of my head I can think of E40, and I know there's some other great features on the album. I just can't think of them off the top of my head, but Everready is a wonderful album. It it's it's also going to be A tier. Okay, so next we have Killer. And I had just listened to Killer like an hour or two ago because, well, I had to listen to it to be able to do this video. And I was kind of dreading listening to it because it's a 32 track album that's over 2 hours long. But it really surprised me. I actually ended up saving every song, not the skits, but every song from the album. I wouldn't say it's one of his best albums, but it's pretty solid, and I'm gonna put it in B tier. Next up, K.O.D. COD. And this is going to be the one that makes a few people mad because, along with Angelic, a lot of people consider KOD to be Tech Nine's best album. And I'm I'm sorry, like I love KOD and all, but yeah, I just don't think it's his best album, and I don't think it's up there with Angelic or Everready either. I love KOD again, but there are a lot of tracks on KOD that I could do without, and for that reason, I'm going to put KOD in B tier. Okay, so next we have All Sixes and Sevens. Overall, All Sixes and Sevens is a very solid album, and there's not a whole lot to say about it. The flow is incredible throughout All Sixes and Sevens, as with most of his albums, but especially on All Sixes and Sevens. Like, it's just impressive. And there's some tracks that I didn't really love a whole lot, but all in all, I do think it's a great album, and I'd put it in B tier as well. Okay, so now we have something else. And this one's kind of tough to do because, on one hand, it's the first Tech N9ne album I ever listened to because, well, that's around when I got into his music, around when Fragile came out, and I liked the album a lot, but after listening to all his other albums, all his other solo albums, I haven't listened to every collabo album yet, but after listening to all of his solo albums, I can't help but say that Something Else is D tier. It's just there's a lot of filler tracks on Something Else. It's not bad, but it's just like a lot of filler on it. And that brings us to special effects. Now this was the first Tech N9ne album I listened to as a full-fledged Tech N9ne fan. And I remember the time when this album was released. When I first listened to it, it was like the most amazing record I had ever listened to. But I was like 14 when it came out, so yeah, that's changed a lot. I'm 18 now, gonna be 19 pretty soon. And I have to say that special effects, it has a lot of great high points, but it also has quite a few low points, and all in all, I think it belongs in C tier. Next up, we have The Storm, and boy, oh boy. You know how I said I was surprised with how much I enjoyed Killer? That's because that's because my experience with Killer was completely different from my experience with Tech N9ne's other 32 track, 2 hour long album. Well, technically an hour and 57 minutes in the case of The Storm, but still, it's a ridiculously long album, and it's not as interesting as Killer was. Like, there's there's more filler on The Storm than on Something Else and special effects combined. And I'd say when it comes to his solo albums, The Storm is probably the worst Tech N9ne record to date because it's just so much filler. It's almost 2 hours, and about an hour and a half of that was completely unnecessary. Like, it's just. I was really hyped for this album, too. You know, it was his solo album after special effects, and when I was that age, I loved special effects, you know, and this came out right after I turned 16, so yeah, I'm I just couldn't really get all the way through the storm on my first listen. Like I just kept pausing it because I was getting bored, and I had to listen to it in segments because it just like the first few tracks kept the energy going pretty strong, but then when you start getting towards the middle of the album, it really drops the ball. It's just the storm. If I had to rate it out of 10, I'd say 6 out of 10, and that would mean 60 out of 100, and 60 out of 100 is a failing grade. At least it was in my school. Um, okay, next up we have Planet, and Planet is kind of the saving grace for Tech Nine's discography. Like, I was really thinking after the storm, and then you had Dominion and Strange Rain come after the storm, which aren't in this video because those are collabos albums, but those were also um not great. Yeah, I was starting to think maybe Tech's starting to fall off. Maybe he's lost that touch. But Planet, man, Planet reminded me why I love Tech Nine so much. And Planet's not a perfect album by any means. There's a lot of not so good hooks on Planet, but all in all, I do think Planet is one of his top 5 projects, and I'd have to put Planet in A tier. Yeah, a lot of people are going to be mad that I put that higher than KOD, but this is my opinion, not yours. Okay, now we have his most recent album, Nina. And let me just start with saying I love the album cover for Nina. I love the color palette. I love how it's half of his face for the album cover and all that. But all in all, there's quite a few great tracks on Nina. I love Like I Ain't. I love Easier for You. I love I Caught Crazy. I love Nina. And I love I'm Sorry. Um, and there's some other tracks on there that I love, but then the other half of the album was kind of eh. And overall, I think Nina would have to go in B tier. I mean, it's it's better than special effects, I'll say that. But it's just not up there with your it's not up there with um yeah, y it's just not up there, okay? Okay, just ignore that my brain just completely shit itself trying to say that. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video and didn't see it as me just rambling on and on about my favorite artist's music. So, yeah, um peace guys.